Well. Look who's live on Twitter and YouTube. It's the Sports Hub Underground. This is Matt Dolloff, and I am here with Ty Anderson, as we are every single episode. Special edition of the Sports Hub Underground today, folks. Big
We're
breaking
live on the
news.
Twitter too. Sorry, didn't
What's
realize
that?
that. I said we're live on the Twitter as well. Didn't realize that.
Yes, yeah. It's Twitter Live's an interesting product. I don't use YouTube much for live stuff, but the Twitter live stuff, it's like you're in there and you see someone's on and you just click it without even thinking. We see people join the conversation here, but anyone who's familiar with us knows why we're on here right now. The Bruins officially announced they have fired head coach Jim Montgomery. Ty, we've talked about it pretty much all season, since the season started anyway. How long is it going to take if they struggle? How long is it going to take for this move to be made? It felt sort of inevitable with Jim Montgomery not having a new contract, and especially as the season got out to a rocky start, never really stabilized. We both agreed it would probably take around 20 games, and lo and behold, it got to exactly 20 games. They're under 500, and Jim Montgomery is out. I think you and I both agree. You wrote about this at 985thesportshub.com that it's not going to instantly solve all the Bruins' problems. I think the Bruins' problems go back to roster building. It goes back to the offseason. And so my big picture take on this is that Don Sweeney, Cam Neely, now you're on notice because now you better make the playoffs. Now you better turn it around because this was the biggest move you could really make unless you want to make a major roster change, but we've said that's an off-season thing. So the Bruins are going forward now with Joe Sacco as their new head coach, but just Ty, your initial thoughts on Jim Montgomery being relieved of his duties.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is now the third head coach firing that I've been on the beat for. And this felt like 16-17 with Claude. When you have two guys on the bench there that interviewed for the job and were finalists for the job now as your assistants, and you are a lame duck head coach and the team isn't playing the way that they got to play. And the roster is the roster. Like, we'll talk more about that later, I'm sure, but like, they weren't responding. It was getting worse. And it felt like, okay, you had some stretches there or some games where you thought, okay, now that's a turning point. And then the losses were getting worse. And the Bruins internally have looked at this current homestand, or not homestand, but this segment here of games. Yeah, 10, 11 games. I would say 9 of them are winnable. They should have been the favorite in pretty much all of them, maybe except for the Vancouver game next week. Like you look at that, and that was supposed to sort of be the moment that the tide would turn in the Bruins' favor. They'd get their game going. They'd find who they are. They'd go from there. No even semblance of that happening out of the gate here. You lose at home to St. Louis. You blow a third period lead. You lose in overtime to a St. Louis team that's straight up bad. And then you find a new low on Monday night. You welcome in a Columbus team that has lost they've won 3 of the last 10. They're last place in the Metro. They're tied for last place with Montreal for being the worst team in the league. And you lose to them. It's not even close. It's not like an overtime loss. You got your doors blown off. Emotionless, flat, nothing, more of the same. And so I think this is the Bruins realizing something's got to change. And it's easier to fire a coach than to trade a whole roster. And so that's where we are right now.
Yeah, that's just how it goes in the business. I mean, like, you don't usually hear us saying like this needs to happen. This guy needs to get fired. Have the Bruins fired this guy yet? Like, doesn't sit right with me just calling for that sort of thing. But like, it's just how it goes. Is that you can't fire the whole roster, and so maybe you could make a major shakeup on the roster at some point. I know we've heard rumors about them making a shakeup of some kind, but we talked about that on our most recent podcast that it's probably not going to be anything huge. So I mean. Yeah, they just weren't getting the right type of response out of any of the players from top to bottom. And I mean, it's not even, and like, yes, they blew that lead to get to the Blues over the weekend, but most of these losses haven't even been close. Like, it's not like they're getting close and then blowing the lead at the end. Like they're just getting, like you said, they're getting their ass kicked. They got their ass kicked by one of the worst teams in the NHL last night, Columbus Blue Jackets. And so, I mean, miraculously, the Bruins still woke up this morning in the 4th spot in the Atlantic Division, but Ottawa and Buffalo right behind them with games at hand. So I don't know that they're going to stay in that spot for much longer, as at least in the short term here. They'd be out of the playoffs if they were in any other division. So it's like it's a wonder how this team has even won 8 games the way they've played. So yeah, I just don't know that they're going to get enough of a boost just from firing the coach. That being said, they're definitely better than they've looked and better than a lot of these guys have produced. Like, yes, we were expecting regression from guys like Charlie Coyle, even like guys like Trent Frederick, Morgan Geeky. Like, you weren't expecting those guys to sort of repeat what they did last year exactly, but they're better than what they've shown this year. And I think even David Pastrnak, who is, potted a goal every now and then, is still not playing up to his usual standard. He's looked sort of lifeless out there for the most part. He's been at best, hit or miss, up and down. He's had a game here or there, but he needs to bring it every single night as their, their best, most talented, highest paid player. So do you think this is going to be enough going to Joe Sacco? You think that's going to be enough to light a fire under the top guys and get what they need out of those top end players? And then maybe we can worry about the secondary scoring, because I'm worried about the top end scoring.
Yeah, I mean, none of their leaders have had a good start to the year. And so you say that, yeah, that Cam and Don are in the crosshairs, and yes, they are, but also this is on their leaders as well. I mean, this is on Marchand, this is on McAvoy, this is on Pastrnak, none of whom are off to a good start. You want to move beyond that, it's on Swayman. Swayman, for all the talk he had in the offseason about setting the market and wanting to be rewarded for, his play, like, he hasn't been up to it, right? And I know that they had a really close relationship, Swayman and Montgomery. They were, it helped him bring him along and be the goaltender that he is today. And so it's a hard moment for him. Those guys have to look in the mirror now and realize that things are changing because they didn't hold up their end of the bargain. I don't know, truthfully, what realistically could have been squeezed out of this roster now that we've had 20 games to look at their shortcomings and where they came up short in the roster building aspect of it. I don't know if a new coach is going to squeeze that much more out of this roster. If things turn around, whether that was for Jim Montgomery, which it won't be, or Joe Sacco, who it's going to be, it starts when guys in that middle six stop shooting 4%. It starts when they stop having the worst turnovers in the world and the worst power play in the league that actually gave up more goals than it scored last night. You have 2 shorthanded goals, scored 1 power play goal. Like, they're a team right now that, yes, their luck is down, but I don't know how much it's going to turn the other way, to really get them back to what they were a year ago. Obviously, 2 years ago, they're not going to be that team. That's a once-in-a-lifetime team, 135 points. Like it doesn't change until those guys wake up, whether it's, again, for Montgomery or Sacco. And now Sacco has that task of waking these guys up. There's a belief there that he could be, maybe more of a, hey, wake up kind of coach than a player friendly coach. But I'm at the point now where, like, listen, you've tried it 2 different ways now. You had the hard ass Bruce Cassidy, which they didn't like by the end of it. And then you had, the player friendly, almost like the nice stepdad, Jim Montgomery. And that didn't work either. And so here we are now. If I'm management, I'm bringing in someone who has a more authoritative voice and is going to rattle some cages and say, you are not playing the way you got to be playing for us to have a chance. And so I think that, I don't know if Sacco is a full-time guy. Like, beyond this, obviously the record's going to determine that for sure. But I think that this group, this team, they need more accountability. They need more accountability at the top. They need someone who's going to kick them in the ass, because clearly the nice guy, the player friendly thing did not work out the way that it's supposed to, because they abused it. I think over time they abused it. And I got to tell you, Matt, I hated when they lost on that game to St. Louis, the overwhelming vibe of, oh, we're close. We know we're close. In what universe? In what universe are you close right now? You look awful. You look terrible. You look disjointed. And they got to get it together here. And they are bailed out by the fact that the Atlantic Division is pretty mediocre out of the gate. But teams like Tampa, even a team like Ottawa, I like their talent. Like, they can turn it on here. Can you turn it on? I don't know. Because you're riding on a roster that has a bunch of guys coming off career years that are not even performing even close to it. So Jim Montgomery is the fall guy, and now accountability starts with those guys in that locker room on the ice. Management, we'll get to. We'll figure that all out. But right now, The only thing that's going to help this team go in the right direction are their players, are the guys on the ice, and them taking some accountability and stepping forward that fashion.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the front office is like a trade deadline and then end of the season sort of discussion where they go from there. And I don't think they're going to make any changes there in season. So yeah, like, do you think Joe Sacco is that hard ass coach? I wonder if these guys need more of like an X's and O's tactician type of guy. And obviously Joe Sacco has been a big part of the Bruins penalty kill and that aspect of their game. He was the head coach of the Colorado Avalanche a while back. His last season there was 2012, 2013, sort of up and down, but they did give him 4 full seasons as the head coach. Didn't quite work out there. He's been with the Bruins for a while now. And just like talking to Charlie Coyle last night and just the way Brad Marchand has talked after a lot of these games. Brad Marchand has talked a lot about compete level, but, Charlie Coyle would say, that starts in practice. And I think he's been very unhappy with the way they've practiced lately. And so I think they always talk about how we need to simplify our game. We need to stick to the game plan. We need to stick to the system. We need to honor that whole thing. We need to play together, play as a unit, all those kinds of comments. And so I wonder if they just need like a true, like detailed hockey guy that can really dig deep on the system aspect of it and sort of get them going schematically and then, come up with something that they really believe in, that they get to practice, and they know that this is something that as long as the coach is there, he's going to put us in a position to succeed because we have the right system in place. And so that would be my wonder. Do you think Joe Sacco has it in him to sort of bring that whole quality to the team?
I mean, he's been here for 10 years now, so he's seen different styles. How does he blend them and make them his own? He was here with Claude, he was here with Bruce, and he was here with Montgomery, and so I think he knows what buttons he can press and what buttons maybe need to be pressed with certain guys that we're talking about that are vitally important to this team. But ultimately, like it begins on the ice. Like I know I'm simplifying this way too hard, but it's a hard sell for me to say that, oh, okay, you're going to promote Joe Sacco and now everything's going to be better. Like, okay, well, he oversees the PK. The PK is one of the worst in the NHL. Okay, before that, he was overseeing the power play. The power play last year was not good for long stretches of the season. And then this year, Chris Kelly had the reins for the power play. They're 11.7% worse in the league. Okay, well, I'm sure he's had a hand in that as well. Joe Sacco, I'm sure it's not all on Chris Kelly. Jim Montgomery had a say in it as well, clearly. But then you go beyond that. Okay, the defense, which Sacco has run in the past, they're allowing, I think, the 28th most, they're ranked 28th in goals against per game. They're not scoring enough. So, like, anyone who you made an internal promotion with this job, while it's the easiest path for them, was not going to be something I was like, oh yeah, here we go, fixed, off for the races. Like,
right.
This is the roster, and this is what the coaching staff collectively has put forth so far, working with this roster. And so I think that ultimately, I think Jim Montgomery, I think the term scapegoat is probably a little too strong, because back in July, Montgomery signed off on this roster. They made the signings. He looked at the roster and he said, we're deeper. We're a better team. Okay, well, then that's on you to maximize those guys so that you are a deeper, better team. I don't think that's been the case consistently. So I put it on everybody, but I also think that thinking that just promoting Sacco is the fix is kind of it's a little bit foolish right now until proven otherwise. At least with Cassidy, like, there was an understanding of like, okay, he's going to play a more up-tempo game. He's going to try to unleash the D a little bit more, create some more high-danger looks than, say, going low to high like Claude was in that final year. It's just so often, so frequently. But I got to see it first. I don't know. We haven't seen Joe Sacco as a head coach in since 2013, which was that the lockout delayed year where they played 48 games. Or 46 games, whatever it was, but he was at Colorado. We got a 6-game sample of it in December 2021 when Bruce Cassidy had COVID, but he was running the Bruins system. That wasn't his own thing. That was 6 games. And so we got to see what tweaks he's going to make. We got to find out more about him as a coach. We're going to find that out on Wednesday after practice when we talk to him for the first time. And I think this is going to be the first time we talk to Sacco since September 2023, I believe, because they don't make assistant coaches available. So we're going to get to know him and what tweaks he's going to make, but he's got to make some to maximize this roster, clearly.
Yeah, he's got to do what he can to maximize what he has, but no, he's not going to be the magic fix. They're not going to all of a sudden turn it around and be a top team in the Eastern Conference because they just went from Jim Montgomery to Joe Sacco. Like, that's not going to be nearly enough. And yeah, you got to look at the players, but I mean, I don't know. We'll see about the tweaks, but like, my bigger concern is that the energy hasn't been there. The pace hasn't been there. And like, look, if they can't pick up the pace and the energy now that they know that they got their coach fired, like, shame on them if they can't, pick it up after that. But that's been the biggest problem for me, is that they've looked totally lifeless. They looked like they have no confidence whatsoever. And so I don't think Joe Sacco alone is going to be enough to get their confidence all the way back up. And so, like, I feel like they might need to sort of get that first win under their belt, hopefully play really good on Thursday against Utah and get that first win with Joe Sacco and sort of get it rolling from there. But like, there have been nights like they played with the pace and the energy and all that, maybe not for a full 60 minutes, but they've come out of these games feeling like, okay, maybe they are turning it around, and then they go back in the other direction. So you have a good start, which they're going to have to start with their energy and all that. And so I don't know, like, yeah, they have to look from within, and they have to look from their leadership. And Coyle is another one who he talked last night. Good for him. He talks after every game, it seems. That he goes up there after every single loss saying he needs to be more vocal. He needs to, push the guys a little more. Brad Marchand feels like he brings it on the ice anyway. David Pastrnak, Charlie McAvoy, alternate captains. I'm not sure what exactly they're doing from a leadership standpoint. And so I feel like all those four guys in particular are like sort of the core of the leadership right now. And so I'm looking at them like they need to pick up the pace, if anyone, even if everyone else is still falling behind. Like, we need to see those guys play better, faster, smarter, sharper, more energy, all those things.
Yeah, and I think honestly for the Bruins, like David Pastrnak's got to give you a lot more. You said Charlie McAvoy, he's got to give you a lot more. Got to be consistent at the very least. Like, Charlie McAvoy should be at the point in his career where the Bruins are able to put guys like Mason Lohrei, like Parker Wotherspoon, like whoever you don't consider a true top four guy at this point in their career, whether it's because of their ceiling or their age, he should be a guy at this point in his career that you're able to put guys there and he elevates them, right? Same thing with David Pastrnak, where David Pastrnak should be able to elevate guys like Bergeron and Marchand did for him all those years ago. Like, they should be at that point in their careers. They're in the prime of their careers. They, as far as we know, are healthy right now. And so it starts with them. And, I think that you mentioned Charlie Coyle. He can give you more, sure, but he also had a career year. But other than that, he's been a third-line center the majority of his career. So maybe that's what he's got to be. And you respect him talking after games, but it does begin at the top. It begins at the top of their roster, and they're going to have to dig deep here and pull together. Like they could be fine. They could totally be fine. It's just until those guys get going, it's hard for me to sit here and go, man, Charlie Coyle's got to give you more. Justin Brazeau's got to get going. Morgan Geekie, what are you doing? Like, they're a team that nobody slots into their proper place until the Stars do. And that's kind of, I think, been a huge problem for this team right now. You look at the way they're playing. You look at the lack of jump. You mentioned it. Like, some games they have it. I would say that they have it for about 8 minutes a game, and then it falls by the wayside. You sort of look at what lines. Yeah, I mean, well, you sort of look at what happened. You look at that Calgary win, the overtime win. They scored 2 goals in 25 seconds, and then they're off to the races. They got all this pep in their step, all this energy. You look at the game against Ottawa at home. That second period, they were dominant, but then they have 0 shots in the third period and they lose in overtime. You look at the St. Louis game. They call a timeout and they got worse. Like, they are just so painfully inconsistent. And I think that really, like, you got a couple of guys that can be true game breakers and take a game over. They are 88. They are 73. You want to include 63 when he's feeling it? Sure. And you have number 1, who's got to be a lot better. Those are your pillars right there. Until those guys get going, everything else feels like window dressing for the Bruins.
Yeah, you touched on Swayman just now and earlier in the show. And yeah, I mean, like, when you're paid that much money and, you went through all that in the offseason, it's a horrible look for Jeremy Swayman to be playing as bad as he has. And excuse me, I thought one of the comments that stood out the most last night was I think it was our guy, Mike Capello, the Bulldog, asking Swayman, did training camp, did not going to training camp affect you at all going into this year? And like I wouldn't say it did at this point in the year. You're a quarter of the way through the season. Like I could see that contributing to a slow first few weeks, but like I feel like he should have his feet under him at this point. But what Swayman said was like what I missed the most was the room, and it feels like he sort of lost some whatever connection he had with his teammates. It feels like he sort of lost some of that, and he has to repair that now. And I'm not sure it has so much to do with the fact that he was playing hardball on his contract so much as that he just wasn't there at camp. And like this goes back to the guys talking about how like we need to get back to practice. We need to practice better. We need to work harder at practice. Allen Iverson. Like it feels like these guys put so much value into those things, and they put so much value into camp that Swayman just not being there the whole time and then signing his contract at the 11th hour and just stepping right in and playing in the second game of the year. Like I imagine that didn't really sit well with the guys. And so I don't know what the solution is there, because Swayman's here. Swayman's the guy for now, but like it feels like there's something going on internally that he needs to repair. At the end of the day, I feel like the best way for him to repair that is to simply play better. And, last night against Columbus, he looked like he was on another planet for a lot of that game. I didn't like at least 2 or 3 of the goals he didn't give up, that he gave up. He gave the puck away while the Bruins, I believe, were trying to get a power play going, or I forget what it was. It was a special team situation, but gave the puck away right in front of his own net. Wasn't really connected with the defenseman there. Almost gave up a goal that way. He hasn't been nearly good enough. Like he needs to be one of their 2 or 3 best players. Like you said, he's not even close right now.
Yeah, I think that I don't know if there's something toxic with it, but he hasn't been up to his level. And I think that, to your point, like you mentioned the payday, he's not going to have the same teams that he had in front of him when he was making entry-level money and then $3.5 million. Like it's just not possible.
Mm-hmm.
If you want 8.5, you want 8.25 million, that's great. But guess what? It's going to come out of the defense. It's going to come out of the forwards, and you're going to have to rise up, and you're going to have to be worth your pay. Right now, he's not worth it. And we're okay saying that. It's just, he's the one guy out of all their problems right now, he's probably the one thing I feel the most confident in turning around. I don't know if Morgan Geekie will ever be a 17-goal scorer again. I don't know if Trent Frederick's going to challenge for 20 again. I don't think Coyle and Zaka are going to hit 60 points again. I have a hard time seeing that.
Even McAvoy hasn't really reached his peak, it feels like. So we're still wondering what the peak is going to look like for McAvoy. Yeah, it's really like Pasternak and Swayman are the guys like, well, I know for a fact you guys are better than this, and you guys need to be a lot better than you've been.
Yeah, but bringing it back to Swayman, that's the one thing that I feel like I can have confidence knowing that he is going to turn it around, because he has been streaky, and these valleys have often come with some great peaks where he's been player of the month or goalie of the month, whatever it is. He rounded his game back into form late in the year to make the rotation feel like it was a viable thing again. And then he took the job on just completely. Like he took it over last year in the playoffs. So you look at him and you look at the way that he has played in the past, that he can turn it around. So that's got to happen. Like that has to happen now. I would go back to more of a rotation until he gets his game in order. I really would. I posted some stats the other day that kind of go along with that idea that maybe he needs more competition or rest between starts. He's been absolutely woeful when he plays a 2 and 3. The second game of that 2 and 3, he's been horrendous almost every time. And Korpisalo's giving you something right now. Korpisalo is one of the only guys I would say that is actually pulling his weight right now for this team.
Solid.
And I think you got to reward that. I kind of go back to, remember I think it was 2018. It was Halak's first year here. He got a weekend back to back because Tuukka Rask was away from the team for a weekend to attend to some personal matters. And Halak was sensational. And then from there on out, it was like, you know what? We're going to give Halak some more run here because he's stepping up right now. And that we got to reward that properly. And next thing you know, it was almost a 50-50 split from there on out. And I think they got to do something similar here. You give the net to Korpisalo a little bit. You know what's kind of ironic about this is that on Sunday, Jim Montgomery was considering going with Jonas Korpisalo for that game on Monday night. He was considering it. He said,
"We need a game time decision, right?"
Yeah, he said we need a spark, and Korpisalo against his old team might be a spark. We might go to that. They don't. They go to Swayman. Swayman gives up 5 goals on 29 shots, and then on Tuesday, Montgomery is fired.
And they make Elvis Merzlikas look like a 99 Hasek for a night.
Brutal, absolutely brutal. But Swayman, I do think that, listen, they built a team to thrive from the net out, right? So if we're talking about a team that needs to correct their issues right now, in theory, it begins in goal with Jeremy Swayman, and then McAvoy, and then Pastrnak. They got to find their identity right now. I think that's the one thing that I want to see happen under Joe Sacco. What is this team's offensive identity? Because it feels like they didn't have one. They would go through all of these almost nonsensical cycling patterns in the attacking zone, all for, at the end of the day, to settle for like a muffin from the back end. You're like, okay, sure. What was all that work for?
Well, we're not a volume shooting team, you know.
It's just not a great quality offensive look for that team. So that's one thing that I think's got to change under Joe Sacco. You got to find out what this team's identity in the attacking zone is going to be and how they're going to maximize that.
And Brad Marchand mentioned identity last night too after the game. It's like we need to stick to our identity. I think sometimes we think we're too skilled, more skilled than we are, and we try to play through the middle of the ice. He said something like that. So it feels like the guys aren't on the same page. And like, that's where I do look at Marchand and say like, no, you gotta get the guys on the same page. You're wearing the C. And so maybe he can get with Sacco and they can work together on that. Maybe those two get on the same page and everybody else sort of follows suit. So, I mean, that's what we're hoping for. Ty, a lot of the comments are, as you would expect, Don Sweeney needs to go. Don Sweeney needs to go. Cam Neely needs to go. Don Sweeney needs to go. They both need to go. Don Sweeney needs to go. I get it. Like, this is the first year in a while where it feels like, I mean, people say this every year, but they've made the playoffs and had some really good teams. This is the first year where it feels like the roster building really, really took a backslide, especially with the signing all these heavy forecheckers, and only a couple of them have really, consistently played well. They didn't add up nearly enough skill. They let Jake DeBrusk walk. They don't really replace that production in any way. And they signed Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov. Neither of those guys are really performing up to, what you were hoping for. So yeah, I guess I'll just bookend it with what I started with. There's just like, now we got to see what the front office does. And I don't know, let's say they turn it around a little bit and they get back sort of into the hunt. Like, they're not necessarily like blowing teams away and getting back to the top of the division. They're solidly in the playoff hunt. Do you see this team all of a sudden becoming a big buyer at the trade deadline? Like, they make a big move at the deadline, maybe trade a draft pick, or you think they're still going to hold on to their draft picks?
Yeah, I'm holding on to the draft picks right now. I don't think you.
But do you think that's what they're going to do?
Yeah, I think that they have to realize that, okay, if the team is not what you thought it was going to be, don't compound your mistakes with more mistakes. Like, you go back to 2015-16, Sweeney's first year on the job, it was a flawed team. But they were basically told, you got to make the playoffs. You got to make the playoffs. So he trades a second and a fourth for Lee Stempniak. He trades a third and a fifth, I believe it was, for John Michael Lyles.
Yeah, don't do that. Yeah,
and
that's my thought. Like, are they gonna fall into that same trap again? That would be my concern.
No, and Matt, and here's what I want to go back to real quick. Look at the guys who actually played well on Monday night. It was Georgi Merkulov. It was Tyler Johnson. And you know what? Screw it. I'll say Jeff VL. He drew a penalty. He came up, he fought, drew a penalty, did his job.
He ate a couple faces, caused some chaos. That's what he was supposed to do.
What do those three guys have in common? They're all hungry. They're not fat and comfortable, with their contracts and their no movement clauses and all of that. They are hungry for opportunity. They're hungry for minutes, and they played like it. And so I think internally, if this happens, let's say Brazeau goes cold. Let's say, you got to make another move. Okay, I want to see Lysell. Okay, if not Lysell, I want to see Kuntar. If not Kuntar or Lysell, I want to see McLaughlin. I want to see Riley Duran. I want to find out what you have in your pipeline. And I think that you fire the coach, that changes expectations, whether it's fair or unfair. And this team, in my opinion, is not worth buying right now. You have to see what you have internally and then make a call from there. This feels like a chance to learn from the mistakes they made in 2015-16. We'll see if they do it. So, but I think that you got to introduce internal hunger. I'm not against a shakeup trade, but we got to see sort of what happens here next. Like how do they maximize some of these guys? With Sacco, I wonder. I wonder if Jay Leach were made the coach instead of Joe Sacco, a guy who coached in Providence for 4 years. What would that do for a guy like Merkulov or Lowry or Lysell? What would that have done for them? Would they be given more rope here? I don't know. But I think you got to find out what you have internally before you start thinking we're going to make a trade for Frank Vetrano or Taylor Hall or whoever else may be available at the deadline. Because right now, this team is not worth spending assets to acquire somebody. I think right now, Matt, to your question, to your point, like the first round pick is more valuable than anything you're going to get at the deadline if you're the Bruins right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I agree that they shouldn't sell major pieces with this team, but let's see what they do. He talked about the mandate to make the playoffs and all that.
I would listen. I would listen on certain guys. Like if you have any doubts about Trent Frederick being a long-term contributor to your team, go back to that Tanner Jeannot trade. And I think Tanner Jeannot and Trent Frederick are very similar player archetypes. They are power forwards. Jeannot's best year came when he shot, 18%, whatever it was, scored 20 goals. And the Preds got a first-round pick, a second-round pick, a third-round pick. They got like 6 picks for the guy. And if you have any doubts about Frederick and you can get that kind of haul, I listen. I absolutely listen. Morgan Geekie, not going to get you a ton, but if he's not in your plans beyond this year, take a call. Listen, see what teams want to offer you. I think right now that's where the Bruins kind of have to be, where they're at a crossroads here and they got to start chipping away at some of their losses they've taken in recent seasons. And it's going to start with this head coach. We'll see if he can pull them out of it. But if this is the roster, they're what? They're 8-9-3 right now.
Yep.
If they're 16-18-6, 40 games in, it's like, okay, this isn't the roster. Try to recoup some assets you've lost over the years. You almost have to do that, I think.
If they're out of the playoffs at the midway point at the trade deadline, and it's time to become sellers, I would hope that that's the direction they would take. All right, Ty.
Sweeney's never sold. That's the weird thing here.
Yeah,
he's never sold ever at any point in his managerial tenure. He's never sold, and so that'd be new terrain for him. But at the same time, like this is where I want to know. We're going to hear from Sweeney on Wednesday. It'd be great to hear from Cam, his boss, or Charlie to say, okay, are these guys on notice now? Like, because as far as we know, to this point, Matt, both Cam Neely and Don Sweeney have been given the vote of confidence again and again and again by ownership. Does this change now? They've been able to fire 3 coaches. To your point off the jump, the bullseye should be on them now. I can't think of a team that's been allowed to fire 3 Jack Adams winning coaches. Like, it's really hard to think of a team that's been able to do that.
Just continually firing coaches that have the best record in the National Hockey League.
Right. So,
meanwhile, you can't draft Meanwhile, you haven't put together a roster that really competes in the playoffs. So, I mean, like, I think it's fair the criticism that they get. I mean, like, it just feels like they can't get over that hump to the next level of like. It's great to make the playoffs. So, yeah, it's fun to play a round or two, but like it's been so long since it really felt like they could get to that next level of actually being a true cup contender. They needed the road to open up for them or like something like that.
We've talked about before. This offseason was a failure. If we're going off what Don Sweeney himself said back in May and then what they did in July, it's been a failure. They said they wanted to get faster. They got slower. They said they wanted to add secondary scoring. They let every secondary scorer they had walk. The crosshairs, like they should be on Don Sweeney. And if they're not, it's a bigger problem. It's a job for life. Are we in job for life territory now? That seems ridiculous to me. So
it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. They haven't gotten out of the second round since 2019.
Like 0 cups.
Yeah, and I remember Sweeney gets kind of snippy with us. He's got snippy with me before, as we all know. We're best friends.
Greatest
Clearly.
rivalry in the world.
But he's basically said, when I'm not fit for the job, they'll tell me. Okay, what's the standard, though? When are you not fit for the job? Is it when you miss the playoffs? Is it when
I think so? That's the second Peter Chiarelli missed the playoffs. He was done. So I feel like that's the
it does feel like the threshold, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It kind of does feel like that. And, they've made the playoffs every year under Don Sweeney, except for the first year where they were in a spot to make it until the final game of the season.
Right. They gave him like a grace period of that 1 year, and they've been,
which is fair, I feel.
Yeah. No, I think that was probably fair to do. 2015 draft notwithstanding. All right, Ty. Well, I feel like that exhausts the hockey topics for one day. I don't know when we're going to do another one of these podcasts, but it's been very busy for us lately, especially on the interwebs. We got plenty of people joining us on this live special edition of the Sports Hub Underground. We thank every single one of you for joining us. Ty, do you have any closing thoughts on Jim Montgomery being fired and Bruins going forward?
Yeah, I will say that it's a bummer to see Jim Montgomery go. A very likable guy, a great story. A great story for anyone who's had to overcome, any sort of substance abuse issue.
And he'll get another job.
Yeah, and he's gonna get another job. He probably gets one this year, to be honest with you. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody, a team that is maybe having second thoughts about one of their guys, be it Derek Lalonde in Detroit or
I can see if Tortorella
Marty
gets it
St.
in Philly.
Louis in Montreal. Like
if Philly gets rid of Tortorella, I could see Montgomery being a logical, swing in the other direction, right?
Former Flyer too. Former Flyer.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I didn't even know that one.
Yeah, I do think
Mr. Immaculate Grid over there with his hockey knowledge.
You never notice that? If you go to Jim Montgomery's hockey DB page, the picture of him as a player is wearing a Flyers jersey. You never noticed that?
I can't say I've perused his player stats.
Well, let me tell you, go look at them. Look at his main numbers. My goodness, that man was an MVP that year.
Oh yeah, he's definitely an Orono legend for sure.
Yeah. No, I think it's a bummer for him, but clearly something had to change here. The players weren't listening, or at the very least, they weren't executing the things that he wanted them to. 20 games is this is a what have you done for me lately kind of league, and it's kind of wild that he was the 10th longest tenured head coach in NHL prior to his firing, which is crazy. Wild to think about.
10 minutes.
Had he been hired 17 days earlier, he would have been the 5th longest tenured head coach in the NHL. So these guys don't have long shelf lives anymore. So Joe Sacco has wanted this chance for a long time. He's interviewed elsewhere. He interviewed in Anaheim for their head coaching gig before they gave it to Greg Cronin. So now this is his chance. So this is a blank canvas for Joe Sacco, who has learned from 3 different guys now in Boston to get his system, his program, and to get these guys into shape. And I'm looking at this with an open mind, man. I'm not, it's not like with Cassidy where I was like, no, I think he's going to be the guy moving forward. If they're a 500 team, there's no reason to keep Joe Sacco around as your head coach beyond this season. There's just no reason for that.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's definitely an audition test sort of period for him. It's going to be interesting to see how the players respond, if they respond to Sacco's coaching style and system and all that. And it's going to be interesting to see how the team performs overall, and then what happens with the front office, depending on how the team does. So, very, very disappointing season so far for the Bruins, but this felt inevitable for a long time, and now it's going to get very interesting. It's going to be very intriguing to see how it goes from here. All right. Thanks for taking the time, Ty. I know it's been a busy couple days for you. It's been very hectic, but we knew we were going to have to probably sit down and do this once this news broke. I thought this was a good time to try a nice live episode of the Sports Hub Underground. So if you made it all the way to the end, or if you saw any of this, thank you. I love you. We very much appreciate all our faithful listeners. And if you're new to us, you can go subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're on YouTube. We're actually live on YouTube right now. Follow us on Twitter, 98.5 Underground, and we do this every week, folks. Not live every week, but we did a special edition today, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for joining us today.